Thank you all for joining us for our last Community Culture Night of our 2022 season. We can provide these lectures thanks to the PNC Charitable Trust, Robert H. Reakirt FDN Equities, along with the Ohio Arts Council, Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, the George Gunn Foundation, others, and you for supporting the arts through your tax dollars. Our next Community Culture Night is on January 26th with Brent Key Young, internationally recognized glass artist who is very sought after for his pretty amazing glasswork sculptures. And be sure not to miss our 7th annual ABC Chili Cook-Off on March 11th. It's always a very fun time. We are so pleased to have Stormy Sweitzer with us this evening. Stormy's field experience and her field of expertise is broad and varied. She holds a bachelor's in economics and Russian language and literature, 2 masters in health policy and management, and entrepreneurship and marketing, plus a PhD in organizational behavior. She has presented papers at many conferences focusing on topics with titles like Girls Who Ride or Strategic Soundbites, Motorcycles, Mindgasms, and Meaning. I am truncating these titles, if you don't mind.
Sounds really fascinating.
Is an accepted manuscript with several more under review. She is also conducting numerous research projects in social media, collective identity, and wonder. Awards include a Fulbright Research Fellowship, a Case Western Reserve Service Award, and #ThinkListNext21. I'm very curious about this. From the University of Bath's Center for Business. Stormy is active with various associations such as the Columbus Futurist Salon and Signals Group and the European Group for Organizational Studies. While a teenager, Stormy began to take pictures using her dad's film camera. This extracurricular activity stayed with her as her career developed. With the advancements of image-making equipment, Stormy shifted to the smartphone for her primary photographic device. The ease and flexibility it offered led her to a sustained practice of wonder. This practice has infiltrated all of her work as a researcher, writer, coach, and foresight practitioner. Her talk tonight, Snapshots, Selfies, and Simulations, the Wonder and Possibilities of Imaginal Technologies, is about how new technologies enable us to cultivate and express wonder, imagination, and dreams in interesting visual ways, and how people use selfies to play with new identity possibilities. Please welcome Dr. Storm.
I did not write that bio. I would say I am a recent PhD graduate from CASE, finding my way in the world, and one of the ways I do that is through images. I study them, I take pictures, I experiment with imagery in many different forms. And so tonight I come here as a professional wanderer. I do research, I make images, and I write about my experiences. And so I would like to start by introducing a term I made up. Imaginal is a word, technology is a word, but putting these two together brings together 2 concepts we might not typically think of. So imaginal, some of you may have heard of imaginal cells that a caterpillar has in its body that allow it to transform into a butterfly. But it also has another meaning, which is to be related to or involving of imagination, images, and imagery, whether in the mind or in the world. And so it can be kind of a loose concept that we capture images, we experience imagery. But when you couple that with technology, and technology, it doesn't just mean laptops and computers. Technology is a way of applying knowledge. And the way that I'm choosing to use this tonight is with the idea of a machine, okay? And my machine that I typically use is a cell phone, although I also use my laptop for some of what I'll talk about tonight. And And so I'm essentially using this mechanical technology, this computer technology, to help me imagine, to convey images, and to capture images in the world. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, is how we can use imaginal technologies like cell phones or like artificial intelligence, which I will touch on today, to really help us wonder at the world around us, okay, the things that are outside of us, to imagine and play with new ways of being or expressing ourselves, or to externalize what might reside in the head, right? So some of us have vivid imaginations, vivid dreams, extravagant ideas, and sometimes we need help putting them in a way that others can envision and see what we mean with our words. So I'll start with the idea of developing a practice of photographic inquiry, or a practice of wonder, if you will, in which I use my cell phone. And this here is a bubble of ice that I taken. This practice for me is not just about taking photographs. When I moved here to Cleveland 5 years ago from Utah, I was a brand new PhD student. I was inundated with mental overload. Okay, reading, writing, all of the things that entailed. And I felt like I needed something to reconnect me with the world and be out in nature to de-stress. I started using my cell phone, and I would go out and I would just take pictures. And at first they were really just documentation. Taking pictures of things I saw, sharing them with family on Instagram, helping them connect to the world that I'm in here. But over time, I realized that what I was actually doing was wondering at this beautiful world, and the nature of my photographs changed. They became more in depth. They became more, I think, feeling or expressive of feeling, and it allowed me to really sort of maintain my connection to the natural world, but also capture what I was seeing. I also, by using the cell phone, was able to use filters. Okay, we often do this in production or post-production, right? Taking your photo, manipulating it to enhance the qualities of it. You can do that on your phone as well. And the way that I would do that was to bring out even more of the expression. If I saw something in the world that on my camera looked light, but I felt it in a moodier way, or I wanted to bring out the sun in a particular, bring out the quality of life or light in a particular way, I would use the filter in that way. And that, for me, was a way of expressing what I was seeing in the world, what I was feeling as a result of it. Here, so this was an early morning walk in Acacia Park. For me, in this image, I was trying to capture the steam in the sun. I really just loved the way that the light hit the water, and the coolness of the water, the heat of the sun brought this magic of steam and mist. But what I didn't realize when I took the photo is that there was a bird flying through. I also appreciated that there was a curvature to a pond, right? They're circular or have curves to them. But in the way the picture showed up, it almost looks like the world, the curve of the earth. And I only saw these things after taking the picture. And so for me, again, it was a picture that I took because I felt something in the moment, but then looking at it and reflecting on it afterwards allowed me to see something that I had not seen before. And I think this is often what happens in life, right? We go through life, we see things, but we're sometimes immune to or ignorant of the small details. They elude us, and this picture was a way for me to see something that I had not paid attention to, I hadn't noticed. Right? It allowed me to capture a moment that I could then look back on in a particular way. Sometimes pictures happen or moments happen where I'm like, whoa, what did I just see? Right? I'm just walking down the street and all of a sudden I see 3 buildings overlap with each other in a way that looks like one. Right? It was a particular perspective. Or going under the underpass on the way to Peninsula on Riverview Road in Cuyahoga. For me that morning, this was a sacred place. It looked like a cathedral, right? And I had to stop my car, get out, go and look, and I just stood there for a moment. And these images, when I posted them, were some of the ones that got the strongest reaction from people because they are so rare, right? We don't often see these things. We don't often notice them. Some things require us to visit a place time and time again to become a companion to that place, to understand how it changes and evolves over time. And for me, this is a very personal thing too, because I think we as humans, we change, we evolve, right? And nature reflects that back to us. It allows us to see that nothing is permanent, right? Life goes through cycles. These are just ways of being. But for me, I keep going back to certain places time and again because those spaces allow me to see parts of myself or help me reflect on parts of myself and what I'm experiencing in the world. Sometimes you have to zoom really close in. There are things that we don't see because we're moving through the world, we're big in the world, and we really have to stop and smell the roses, if you will. I hate to use all these cliches, but they're true. They're true. Stop and smell the dahlias, right? Stop and see that spider web and the little tiny spider that's made its home in this beautiful flower. And Patricia, thank you for inviting me to see this. Right, there are places where we go where all of this buzzing life exists, and we really have to zoom in to see it. Sometimes we also have to zoom out, and so I mentioned I just graduated from the PhD program, and last year I started having doubts, curiosities, wonderings, let's say, about what I would do after I graduated. Many of my peers were going into academia. I had some mixed feelings about it at the time, and as a future-oriented person, I was surprised when I couldn't see pathways forward that seemed right for me. What I had in my head was like a dark oval that I would see. I'm a very visual thinker, so I had this dark oval in my head, and it's sort of stuck with me all year, and I've interpreted it as I'm just in a state of transition in my life right now, and I'm just allowing that space to be there. I don't have to fill it, I don't have to understand it just yet, it just is. But sometimes it troubles me. Well, I went for a walk last week. I had to make a big decision about something, and it just so happened on that morning, the pond near my house was mostly frozen, but the sun had come out, and it was so warm that it created a dark oval, a void in the lake. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's what I'm seeing in my head. But I had to zoom out, and the sun forced me to. The sun reflected on that lake in such a way that it seemed like the sun was stretching to me. It was reaching for me, right? And so suddenly I was seeing this void being sort of the mediator between this light that was reaching towards me, warming me from above. And I took numerous photographs and started playing with them, superimposing them. And I thought, when I tilt it on its side, it's kind of like a flashlight. And the void is really just a channel for light and brightness and newness and transformation. And so for me, photography really does allow me to zoom in when I need to see things, to notice things that I typically wouldn't, but to also zoom out and realize that sometimes there's a bigger picture, and zooming in is not the only way, right? We have to sort of shift perspective certain times of our lives to understand things. So this is a very personal practice for me. Right? And by doing that, I'm able to see beauty reflected in otherwise muddy waters. Okay. I think sometimes the other thing is just being able to look and see something beautiful. This is a photo, I just doubled it over, but like grass is not something I typically look at. It's just grass. There's so much grass. But again, on that particular morning, there was this steam rising, and I saw all these little droplets. And for a while after I took this photo, I used it as my Zoom background. And every single time, people would ask me, what is that? Where is that? Right? So I was evoking a sense of curiosity in the people around me. And when I explained what it was, they couldn't believe that there was this dark background, this lake that was behind the grass. Like it just was intriguing to them. So it can also help us connect with other people. It can help us evidence of things not seen, right? We often think about the spider. How often do we think about the web as evidence of its existence, right? Deer tracks, things of that nature. To me, the absence of presence is kind of an interesting idea, right? We can see the thing, but not see it. I don't know. That's not very clear, but this to me was very striking that morning. And sometimes we see things that are there, aren't there? What do you think? What do you see in this? Yeah, I saw spaceships. I mean, so we can look around and see things that are different than we might think of them otherwise. Here, again, comparing different locations. The picture on the far side is taken in the Netherlands when I visited my brother. The picture here was taken in Pittsburgh while I was walking down the street. I ended up taking this bouquet of flowers home to my Airbnb and putting it in. But the flowers are beautiful regardless of their surroundings, and it just was striking to me. So that's my first part of this presentation. I'm curious, what practices of wonder you have? What are the ways that you engage with the world around you, or find ways to connect with it through art or life? What stands out to you as a practice that might help you do that? Yes.
I've always been into nature and trees, that kind of stuff. I have 150 photos of bark of trees, whether it's like hollows, bark that has fallen over. And what I really want to do one day is make these into a collage and like have one whole wall in my living room showing, the smooth bark, rough, animals living in it. So when I walk in the woods, it's not just a tree I'm standing next to. It's something else, a three-dimensional,
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. And bark's interesting when you look at it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I collected a bracelet of bark that came off of a tree here.
Oh.
Like it was shaped like a band, right? We can have different experiences with nature when we dive into it. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, Mom was willing to jump off the track, I think, as far as my practice goes. And the daily example is walking by my studio and going into it without a plan.
See what comes up.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you. Okay. Well, off to the next imaginal technology then. A selfie. Who here takes selfies? Who here has seen a selfie? Yeah, they've sort of taken over our world in a way, the way we think about ourselves. And I think sometimes we often think about them as like narcissistic, right? People are just taking pictures of themselves all the time, or like, why aren't they looking at the world? They're just looking at themselves, or they're trying to impress people in some way. And sometimes they can even cause harm. But I think I'd like to share an alternative viewpoint tonight that I have found in my research studying how people use selfies in a particular way. So I'm going to start with a couple of different examples of how people use selfies that I find interesting. And one is an identity project. And this is a woman who goes by the handle Flora Forager. Her identity, her livelihood, her creative practice is tied up in the use of flowers and other organic materials and using them to paint pictures, to create dioramas, to create these elaborate headdresses. And she does this throughout the year. And sometimes they're simply headdresses, Sometimes she tries to recreate imagery from history or from photographic sessions, portraits that she finds online. But they get a huge response from people, and they have become a project that she engages in over time. You can see transformation in her. You can see the way she has perfected her craft. And so for her, it is a major part of the way that she engages with other people and has developed a very recognizable identity for herself. This is a completely different kind of selfie. And one of the things that happened during the pandemic is that people began experimenting with things. They found themselves locked at home by themselves. And while men have always been involved in the makeup industry, during the pandemic, many of them only had themselves as models. And many young men also decided they wanted to start sharing and expressing more of their skill and craft and identity. And so it turns out that during the pandemic, young men have become some of the top makeup artists online. And they share selfies of themselves. But the way that people respond to them is with a feeling of freedom. It's like, I see you doing this and it makes me feel braver. It makes me feel like I can express myself in a way that maybe I didn't feel was possible before. Okay. So it becomes an empowering thing to be able to share a side of yourself that maybe is not typically safe to share. And you can find community through the sharing, through the use of hashtags online. And this happened with a number of different communities. Here's another example. So back in the 60s, some scientists started a program called Draw a Scientist. And they asked young children in grade school, middle school, and high school to draw pictures of scientists. And back in the 60s, 99% of those images were drawn of white men, okay? Which is pretty typical with what a scientist was at that time. However, today, something like 55% of biologists are female. About 35%, 40% of chemists are female. And women are enrolling in STEM careers at faster rates than men at some points in different fields. And so when they look at this Draw Scientist test today, it's still pretty male dominated. Boys tend to draw men. Girls, about 70% of the time, I believe it is, still draw men. But it's shifting. We're seeing a shift. So to try and shift that and shift perspectives, a campaign started a few years ago where individuals, women specifically, from different fields, different backgrounds, were able to take pictures of themselves, selfies, and hashtag, this is what a scientist looks like. Okay, and they flooded social media with images to try and shift the narrative. And this is a great thing for one reason in particular, and in addition to increasing visibility and representation. One of the things that happens with searches, when you do an image search online, if you were to type scientist, up until a recent period of time, most of those images would be of men. And when you can flood the internet with pictures of women where that image is tagged as scientist, the algorithm starts to shift. And so the search engines also shift. And there are people who use this as a form of activism to change the visual narrative of what a person type can be. Okay, so we're starting to see a shift in gender and racial representations of what certain fields can be represented by, who can do what, how you can be in the world. Okay, even makeup artist. Okay, the term makeup artist often brings up a lot of women. You have to type in male makeup artist to see that, to see men. So we're starting to see some shifts there. Okay, I'm gonna ask you a question. What images come to your mind when you think of motorcyclists? Yep, who else? What else? Harleys, yep.
Save money on gas.
Yep.
All of those things, right? So yeah, I mean these are really common images that we think of. They're iconic. Oh, did you have an answer? Rock music, yes. All of that, right? Look, rock and roll. So we have all of these images that we think of when we think of the word motorcyclist. However, social media has completely changed that. And so when Lila introduced me, she said, I have a paper called Girls Who Ride. I've done some research on female motorcyclists and how this tide is changing to the point that women now make up the fastest and largest growing demographic in the motorcycle industry. And motorcycle companies are having to shift gears, so to speak, to accommodate them. And so Instagram, interestingly, is cited as the birthplace of a contemporary global sisterhood of female motorcyclists. And it's changing what a motorcyclist is. It's creating new ways of being, primarily through selfies. And I wanted to understand this because, again, selfies can be seen as a negative thing, as a harmful thing potentially, but they're also acts of empowerment, affirmation. They're visual narratives and ways of, like I said, the identity projects. They're ways for people to share who they are in ways they want to be seen, and to also mark what communities they belong to. And so this was really intriguing to me. How does this work? So I'll dive into the research just briefly. This is the only time I'll do this. There is research that says we always attempt to manage how we're perceived in social situations, right? We dress a particular way, we act a particular way, we act one way with our friends, a different way with our work buddies, right, and around our boss. So we're constantly managing impressions. Social media facilitates this, right, because we get to present ourselves in a particular way. We get to curate how other people see us. They're a form of identity performance in that respect, right? I am performing who I am when I show up in a particular way, take a photograph, and post it online, right? It is a performance. What researchers have found, though, is that the picture I take of myself might influence you. I might take my selfie in front of the Cleveland sign, hashtag it, and next thing I know, all my friends are like, hey, let's all put selfies in front of the Cleveland sign. Okay. Maybe a little more complicated than that, but that is the essential. Other people might mimic the posture, the place, the way of taking that selfie. And so we see some mimicry happening. Another thing that we know is that you talked about the Hells Angels. Okay, there's particular symbols and ways that you would identify somebody who's a member of that club. That's common, right? You're wearing a shirt from Syracuse, right? That's a symbol of loyalty to a particular school, right? So we have these symbols and images that we use to identify belonging, loyalty, commitment, support, but we don't really know how new images take hold. Okay, very often we know that people gravitate to existing images. I wanted to understand, how does something catch collective imagination? And so I studied selfies. I studied pictures that women, and these are not the ones I studied. I'm using these as examples because I don't have permission to share the ones I want to. But what I did is I took about 500 images from a social media account of an organization I was studying, and I started to categorize them. And what I realized is that there were typically 3 kinds of stories being projected. Stories of being a woman motorcyclist. What is it to be a motorcyclist? What are we like? What motorcycles or gear do we use? Where do we ride? What do we ride? And why do we ride? And some of the data I found was like, it's empowering. There's nothing like it. This is who I am. This is an incredible experience. I also found stories about being a group member. What we as a group do, what we are becoming as a group, and who we are. And finally, I found stories about being part of something bigger than oneself. Who do we support in the larger world? Who we ride with, right? It wasn't just about the local group, it was about connecting with other people, organizations, so on and so forth. And so I call these projections of possibility. They're projections of possible selves, possible identities one could inhabit, possible ways of being in group with other people, and of connecting to a larger idea. And ultimately, what I found is that when people post stories that other people resonate with, there's some sort of resonance spark, right? You see it and you go, oh my gosh, I want to be that, or I could do that, or this is fascinating to me, or I'm like that, right? That resonance spark can kick off a whole bunch of things. It can kick off what I've called identity play here, which is people will say, oh, I could do this. And I see them make comments on an Instagram post. They'll see a picture, and in the comments they'll say, oh my gosh, I want this. I want to learn how to ride a motorcycle, right? I could be a motorcyclist. You also see people, often men, saying, hey, let me tag my girlfriend. You could do this. I can see you being a motorcyclist. You're adventurous. You'd have fun doing this, right? And we're sort of projecting an identity onto another person. And sometimes people engaged in sharing this experience. They'll tag their girlfriends and say, hey, why don't we do this? We could do this together. And so they start trying on these identities. And then they go off and do real world activities like buy a motorcycle, learn to ride a motorcycle. They do stuff out in the real world and then take pictures of themselves doing it. Okay? And it cycles back to new visual stories that are projected. And people celebrate them. They're like, yes, awesome. You can do it. This is amazing. Keep going. But what I also saw was that people engaged in social play. And this was more around who are we as a group? How are we starting to navigate this identity of female motorcyclists? What does it mean for us to be female motorcyclists? And some of the things I saw are that sometimes a picture was shared of a street bike, and somebody would say, hey, I ride a dirt bike. Can I still be part of your group? Can I still be considered, one of you? And so they're testing the boundaries of what it is to be not just a female motorcyclist, but to be part of this community. And so this social play was very, very interesting. And what I found is that this led to the formation of a global organization. And these activities enabled these individuals who were all over the world to find each other online, to feel affirmed in their identities, and then to connect with other people who shared that identity with them. And I studied motorcyclists, but I can guarantee you this applies to many, many, many other identity groups, new identity groups, male makeup artists, female scientists. We connect through social media in different ways, and we're able to build community. And so to me, selfies are really powerful in that they help us express who we are, find connection with others, and begin to think about new possibilities. Okay. So, selfies as an imaginal technology, connecting us with that sense of play and identity and affirmation. Okay. Now we get into the third imaginal technology. Say co-creating with artificial intelligence to express our inner worlds. How many of you are familiar with the storm of AI-generated artwork that has popped up this year? Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is it's a technology that allows you to generate images whether you have artistic abilities or not. What you need is the ability to use language and to have ideas, dreams, imaginings, okay? I'm going to use some language here. Everybody's familiar with abracadabra, correct? So the Aramaic for this means I create as I speak. And we use language, right? Magic is speaking something into existence. It's just illusion, right? So we're going to think about this as a form of magic, if you will, a magical technology. And it essentially allows us to use word prompts to generate images. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So I am of Mexican descent. I am a futurist in my way of thinking about the world. and I wanted to play with the idea of Latino futurism. And so I used a word prompt, woman, Mayan, futurism. I put 3 words into this software called Midjourney, and these are some of the images that came out of that. Okay, some of them are a little rough. We see the eyes are not quite right, they're a little wonky, but in general, very colorful. They are not necessarily things I would have come up with on my own. And it allows me to think about new ways of conceiving of what a Latino futurism might look like. Okay, and there were many, many other examples that came up, but these were some of the ones that were most striking to me. I also looked at emotion. So this is another thing. We don't typically think about visualizing our emotions, but when you look at these, Midjourney, they give us a similar color palette for both a difficult time and a happy time, but we can clearly see that the images, the shapes, some of the direction, I don't know, it all feels very different in a way. Do you catch the sense of the emotion in each of these? So I chose 2 of these to enhance a little bit. And one of the things I'd like to say about this is I coach people. I've been an executive coach for over a decade. People have difficulty expressing emotions. Some of the coaching techniques we use are, tell me the color that you're feeling. Or is there a shape to your emotion? Is there a way that it makes you feel in your body? And, oh gosh, maybe it won't. But by using prompts in a software program like this, they can actually start to articulate that in a way that maybe they can visualize the emotion for themselves. And it can help them talk about things because they suddenly have a way of experiencing it and recognizing that emotion for themselves in ways that maybe they were not able to articulate previously. I found this very interesting as a way to help visualize emotion. Okay. I've started experimenting with dreams. I'm a very vivid dreamer. I often keep a notebook by my bed and write down my dreams. Sometimes I doodle. I'm not the best artist, and so this is what you get, right? if I'm the one trying to express my dream in a visual form. And so I thought I would experiment with this story that I had about a one-eyed fairy who was really dissatisfied with her life. Her family just gave her some position in the family that she didn't like. She left. She flew away, and she finds herself in this place with baby goblins. And in my mind, I saw these little pea-shaped, pods of goblin babies on a stalk. So I took a version of that, a prompt, and I said, dissatisfied one-eyed fairy talking with baby goblins rolled up in balls and clinging to tree branches. Cute, animated, colorful. So I didn't get one eye. I didn't even get the delicacy of the fairy that I had on the previous page. But I didn't specify that I wanted some dainty fairy creature, with long limbs and long hair. So I got what machine learning has decided is the correct version of a fairy, various versions. I kind of like them. And we kind of see some baby goblin pods in the, there's like little weird eyeballs and whatnot. I kept experimenting though. And eventually I got something closer to what I was looking for. And, they're still odd, but I have my one-eyed fairy who looks a little dejected, and my little goblin pod babies. And I don't know, I kind of like it. It feels very, animated in a way. So maybe not the perfect version, but definitely one that's interesting. I also had a dream where I was caught in a tidal pool, and a whale saved me. But the whale wasn't swimming upright. It swam upside down, and those pictures of whales where people draw them and they're kind of square, right? This one was upside down, flat bottom, and I jumped on the belly of the whale and went sailing off. And as we sailed off to safety, it started picking up other passengers, including a giraffe. And it took us to this island where we walked through a tunnel of wisteria. It was a beautiful dream. And I typed those prompts in, but I realized I didn't specify whether the giraffe was standing on its own belly or the belly of the whale. And so the software interpreted it in this way. And again, it's kind of cool. It's kind of abstract. It's interesting. But it gives me something to play with in my mind. Here, I dreamt of a woman with a red cape on a cliff. I was seeing her from below. And I rendered this in two different ways. One, I just said what I wanted, a woman in a red cape. But then I started practicing with different art types, so genres of art or ways of looking at things. So this one is a paper cut craft, paper illustration. So you begin to see the difference when you start to specify and look at very particular ways of rendering the art. This one is a little different. I had like a spy dream or something, and accordion folder ghost movement was the term that stuck in my head from this. And I generated these things, and then I created a video. I never really knew what these words meant, but I wrote them down. They stood out to me. And this gave me a new way of understanding them. Like, how might somebody else interpret it? But I'm not the only one that does this. A friend of mine recently started using Midjourney as a way to create images to accompany her social media posts. And in her, she's very conceptual. She just says, I want to create a mood, right? I want to understand imagination or happiness. And she chooses words or configurations of words that allow her to develop a feeling that she then shares alongside the words that she uses. Here, Dr. Starshine, as she calls herself, has said, you know what? We have too many defaults in our society. We don't have enough representation of people of color who are disabled, people who are disabled generally, in fantasy. She writes fantasy, is part of fantasy communities, and so she says accessibility belongs in fantasy, and I'm diversifying AI art using Midjourney one prompt at a time. And if you go into AI art generating communities, very often what you see are, again, default images, because the way that these software programs are developed is they are trained on the images that exist in the world. Okay, the vast majority of images tend to be centered on Caucasian, often very particular or idealized bodies, and so we wind up with defaults that reinforce those stereotypes or biases. So you have to be very particular in your prompts and specify body type, color, race, country, okay, but it allows you to develop really beautiful images that can help convey things that you might not otherwise be able to convey. And coupled with social media, there are no gatekeepers necessarily, right? You can post these images on social media, and with hashtags, again, disability awareness, for example, or disability in fantasy, you begin to develop connections with other artists. This artist, Smitty, as he goes by, he's a poet and a digital creator who has started using AI to reimagine the past. So he will take different eras in time, and in this particular one, he's looking at back in the day when Hollywood did not light Black people in a way that really allowed them to shine. And so he's using prompts that allow him to say, how do we reimagine history? How could we do better, right? How can we understand a better way of doing things in the world? He also captures really intimate moments or generates really intimate moments. And these are generally moments of tenderness, power and strength, kindness, even sexual intimacy between Black people. And in his world, he's saying, I am capturing stories of people who are not real, in a time that doesn't exist, in places that don't exist. And yet these stories do or should exist. Some people are using AI to help us envision possible futures. Here we see a biotopia. How do we live in an organic harmony with nature? How do we create a future where we are able to actually live in that kind of harmony? Others, and I don't know if it's going to work. I don't think it will. I'm sorry. For some reason, the video's not popping up. What I was going to share, however, is somebody else has said, you know what? As much as we need to see positive futures, sometimes we need to see actual problems that are sometimes invisible to us. And the artist on the other side created images of fish trapped in plastic bags. We have so many plastic bags that make their way into the waterways and the oceans. And so he captured that and created a video that showed people this is what happens when we don't care for our environment. Okay. Those things that are invisible to us sometimes need to be made visible for us to understand the impact of our actions. Here we see palindromes, somebody imagining bird rib, for example. So really, I just want to highlight this as a way of playing and to share that it has enabled people of all ages, all backgrounds, to start imagining new ideas, new realities, bringing their ideas to the forefront. This particular individual, he is not an artist in the sense that he could have created this on his own previously. He's somebody that has a facility with technology, and he was able to take story ideas in his head and suddenly be able to generate images to accompany them and create graphic novels. And in the space of 3.5 months, he created 3 graphic novels. You could download them for free. I put his website down there, campfirenyc.com. But what I've seen in the forums is that people of all ages, somebody introduced their 80-year-old mother to this. And she's like, wow, I can type a few words, get this great image. So it's a very interesting, creative way to do things. And people who are artists, there's wide debate around the ethics and the practice of art with AI-generated art. This individual she had a practice of creating self-portraits that she would manipulate in Photoshop. And this dates back several years. She has started training the artificial intelligence models on her own image and then generating new ideas based on them. And so she was just offering a comparison between her old way of making art and her new way of generating art using the technology. So that's what I have. I just wanted to share these 3 ways of bringing our subconscious to light, to connecting with the outer world, to expressing our identities, and I would love to hear your thoughts, your own experiences, your questions. Yes.
We've got a 4-part question.
A 4-part.
4 to 6. 4 to 6.
4 to 6. Okay.
Is all of the AI art that you just showed, was that all made using the same AI platform? Is it that Mid-Journey? Is that what?
Most of it is.
Okay.
Most of it is, not all of it. I would say the latter picture, I think she uses something called Stable Diffusion, a different platform, and one that she's been able to actually manipulate. I believe it's open source, and so she can go in and add some of her own photographic data and generate images trained on her imagery as well. And so some artists are learning how to bring their own paintings, their own photography in. They'll take photographs of it, bring it in, and then generate new images based on their style. And some of them will then paint it in the real world. I've seen people generate jewelry, architectural design ideas, and then go build them. Sculptures, whatever it might be, yeah.
Is it free?
It is free.
Who owns the rights to the art?
That is an interesting and ongoing question. In the beginning, many of these organizations said that you were a co-creator with Mid-Journey, and so while you or Mid-Journey or Stable Diffusion, I believe, and so don't quote me on this, but I believe the way that it used to be is that you had rights to to the art that you generated with this software, but you extended a license to the company to maintain that use of that image if they wanted to in a particular way. Didn't mean that everybody could use it, but that they could. Yes.
Other than that last one where she kind of used her own art to influence what the AI art built.
Yeah.
Do the other people? Is the art what the AI puts out, or is the art the prompt that they put in?
That
And
is
if it's-
another big question.
And if it's the prompt, do they willingly share the prompt, or does that become
No,
like a
not always.
proprietary kind of? How did that Mr.
It's changed everything. Right now, there are questions about, is this art or not? If you generate it, are you an artist or not? Or are you just a prompt engineer? Okay, which is different. Who owns the copyright becomes a bigger question, and depending on how much you pay, which service you use, that question might change and be different. Okay, some people will pay extra in order to keep their images private and not have to share that that image with the public. In public forums, some people share their prompts because they see this as this is a revolutionary new way of generating imagery. I'll just call it imagery. I won't call it art for now because I know that that's kind of a contested term with this right now. But it is something that they feel is necessary to help the community and the technology grow and people learn. Okay, especially when it comes to biases, because when you can present the prompt that you shared, you can help people see what is the language that you're using to help generate particular imagery. Okay, how are you helping show diversity of skin color, gender, body type, all of these things. Okay, so the more you can share the prompt, the more broadly we understand how images are generated, and we can also sort of, I would say, play against the biases that are inherent in the technology. But not everybody is willing to share because they come up with this particular style or a particular way of doing things that they don't want others to know.
Last part. I think this is part 4.
Okay.
Mr. Smitty, I think, is the guy, but
Yeah.
his AI art looked like a picture or photograph.
Yeah.
Is he using the same AI art platform? Yes. And so what would he be using for a prompt that makes it depicted as like a photograph as compared to what yours was?
Most likely photorealistic. Okay, so the term photorealistic or photograph. So Dante and I were generating some art in a style that he prefers. So hyper-realistic drawing, for example. So you use that term, you're going to get a very different kind of look. And so you might say hyper-realistic drawing, black and white, charcoal, things of that nature to elicit a medium and a way of generating a style. Yeah. Yes?
Can you recreate the same, okay, so, you know, the fairy, when you finally got to your fairy, and that was pretty much what you wanted, can you recreate that fairy in another scene? Or is it just one, you know, that
Yeah.
image is that?
So that's part of what people are experimenting with. Let me see if I have some extra slides. So the gentleman who was making graphic novels, for example, he has started training the software to be able to create a particular style. And he says now it doesn't matter, you know, if he writes Idris Elba in there, he's going to get him as an astronaut in the particular style that he wants. But this allows him, and what he said here is, you know, when he first started this, he would do what are called re-rolls. So it will give you 4 ideas to start with, and you get to select which one you most relate to or connect with. And then you can generate variations of it. You can up and enhance it. You can remaster it to look more professional. And yet when you train it yourself, and he uses Stable Diffusion for this, he's able to now very quickly generate, like I think 4 pages of artwork a day because it's trained in the style that he wants, but he can create new backgrounds.
And what does he use as a password or whatever? I guess I'm not familiar enough with this, but it seems to me that if somebody else enters words in
Yeah.
that are like his,
Mhm.
prompts like his, but they add something additionally to their prompts. When he does it again, he's gonna end up with something different than the first time he did it.
Yes and no. And so here's where my knowledge is more limited. And partly, I think individuals who are able to not just use the public software, but actually train the software with their own images under a separate account, they're able to maintain some control over what is entered into that.
Separate account being the operative term there.
Yes, a separate account, not a public account. So Midjourney, for example, you have to use it in a social platform, and you see hundreds of other people using it at the same time, and it's chaotic. But some people are able to have private accounts, and they can have a little more control over some things. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
So, as a futurist, where do you see this technology being used for good and bad in the future?
Yeah, I mean, for good, I think for me, part of my initial interest in this was how do we generate images of possible futures? And I interacted with some individuals and various organizations that were interested in using this as a way to help groups imagine new possibilities. And so, for example, one individual I spoke with said, hey, I live in a community where we have a very traditional resident culture. They've been here hundreds of years. We have immigrants coming in who have a different culture, different agriculture from their home countries, and we want to imagine how these two groups might create new farming possibilities in our community. And so we played around with images that looked at using prompts from these two different cultures and the foods, and we never tested it, but it was a way of saying, how do we create a visual scenario where people can at least have a conversation around what might be possible, what might be a way to harmonize our different cultures as our community changes. So that I think is one way of doing good, is how do we imagine new futures? How do we use this to expand or augment creativity, right? People like myself who can't draw, this for me was liberating because I could create images that in my mind's eye I can see them, but I can't express them on the page. Yes.
And it's not a question, it's a comment. Number one, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank Community Culture Night because every time I come to this event, my mind is always blown. You just cleared like 3 roadblocks for me. And I say that because I'm driving around today and I'm going, I really don't use my new camera. I haven't used it in a year. And I take it to the Czech Republic and I use my phone. You know, so I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I gave my camera away.
Right.
It's heavy, it's clunky.
Yeah, exactly. I'm fine with it. And and then I'm thinking, so the nature thing.
Yeah.
Every day I walk my dog, almost every day, and I take pictures of the same things just about every day. Because it becomes a ritual, it becomes a prayer, it becomes a thank you, to the universe. And then there's the selfies. You know what I mean? And it's just like, you guys have probably all seen me at events. Everybody get behind me. It's just, whatever. It's a beautiful thing. But you can just blow my mind with AI, because I'm sitting here going, I'm a very vivid dreamer. And I can sit here right now going over the dreams that I've had all week in my head right now visually. Now I'm gonna try to make them come out with AI.
Yeah.
Because I don't draw either. You know what I mean? I'm a photographer, by trade, and I can make my hand do stuff. But I'm like, I'm gonna see if I can train this AI and mess with this AI. Do whatever I can to make it come out the way my head is seeing it. Because that would just be fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, it would just be fun. So I mean, that's just 3 roadblocks.
Excellent.
Clear it in one night. Thank you. Thank you for that. Because AI is very suspect and very wonderful, and it's probably all open source, which makes a lot of it free at the moment. And I don't want to be training anything for some alternate universe where I don't exist, but whatever. But, thank you for all these revolutions or little magical moments. Because that's exactly what this was about.
May I add one more thing when you asked me where do I see this not being good?
Yeah.
So biases oh my gosh, like sometimes the images that are generated are idealized is not even a kind word. They're like
Exploitative?
potential, not necessarily exploitative, because all of these have words that they don't allow. They have filters because some of the things they just don't want really that imagery. But I will say in terms of like women's bodies, for example, I've never seen like body proportions like some of the ones I see. And so you see sort of this balancing right now where some people generate images that have these outrageous body types, and others are saying, I'm going to generate representative body types. And so we're seeing sort of this conversation going on. Deep fakes is an area where this can be potentially harmful, right? We already have people messing around with images that convey certain known people in situations in which they did not exist or engage in things. And so it becomes really difficult sometimes for people who cannot discern the difference between the real image and the generated image to know what's real sometimes. And so that's an area where this could become potentially interesting. I heard of somebody who generated a story basically of a UFO sighting, and then they posted it in a UFO spotting group. And everybody got really excited about this new data that was found, and it was all made up, right? So there are things that can happen that are potentially not good, of course. And I think right now we're really seeing a lot of concern and debate around what happens to traditional art, and what are the ethics of using technology like this. It is trained. I think in one I saw multiple billions of images that were scraped off the internet from blogs, from e-commerce sites, from Pinterest, right? All of these places, artist websites, you name it. And so all of these images come into the model, and let me see if I can find it. So all of these images come in, and what the AI does, it doesn't search the database and say, oh, let me pull up a picture of a cat and use it in this thing. It trains on all images of cats, and it learns what cat-like features are, okay? And then it trains on what epic portraits are. And very often, some of how that happens is people, when you upload an image, you may have named the image in a particular way, or on social media, you might have used a hashtag that helped people understand that. And so suddenly, all these portraits that have been tagged as portraits become the basis for the machine to understand, okay, what is a portrait? What are qualities of a portrait? So I can then say, portrait of whomever, a movie star, for example, a cartoon character. I can say I want it photorealistic, and it might turn SpongeBob SquarePants into this photorealistic image, a photograph of him. And so we end up with all sorts of weird configurations of information. And so you bring these two things together, an epic portrait of a cat, and it takes all of this data and sort of imagines imagine, I think that's a weird word, but in a way, it's able to generate a wholly new image from what it's learned about what that image is representative of. So, I don't know, did that answer I don't know what question was asked. Anyway, yeah. Yes.
Well, at the Cleveland Photo Fest right now, one of the displays is by a guy named, whose last name is Perlman Hall, and he created a whole exhibit of AI things, and they're very, very seductive. They're so amazingly beautiful. I would call them hyper beautiful, and I feel like Gina does. Your whole talk has exploded my mind with ideas for teaching and stuff, but I'm also a little bit aware that it can take us as humans and kind of work us out the back door.
Yeah.
And suddenly as artists, and isn't this what you said is the point of these? Isn't this always what artists have done anyway, only they've done it in technologies.
Yeah,
they
I think
want.
when the camera was introduced, right?
Right. Then it
It's
was
like,
like, oh,
oh,
you're not
You're
an
not drawing.
artist anymore.
Yeah.
The camera's drawing.
Yeah.
Which was great.
And I think there are multiple questions around that. It's like, okay, are we the artist, or are we co-creators with the AI? Is the AI the artist and we're just wordsmiths? If I was a graphic artist and used, Procreate or whatever to generate images, can I generate them here and still be an artist? And I've seen different people respond to this in different ways. And some people say, hey, we got to get with the program. The technology changes. It always has. And as artists, we need to evolve. That's one group. There are other groups that say, no, this is not art, and we are banning any photographs generated by AI from our photo group. We're banning any paintings generated by AI from our painting group. And this is dangerous because it puts us all out of jobs. And I think in some respects it may. Companies that purchase art, commercial art, that purchase graphic art, they can get an intern to say, hey, we need a mood board for X, Y, and Z, or we
You
want
Coca-Cola imagery or something.
Yeah. and so they can get some cheap art. But I think one of the things that it does is it also allows people to say, I've seen people say, this improves my workflow. When I have a client who says, I really don't know what I want, but I think it has these 10 things, they can go in and generate 20, 50 mock-ups in the space of 20 minutes, show them to their client, and they're like, oh, I want a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that. They can then take those ideas and generate an actual image that combines these ideas, right? And so instead of having to draw them and generate them in a manual way, they're able to very quickly save time, get a client response, and then move forward. So I think there are different ways to think about it for different types of art. Yes?
Well, I have a comment on it's several things I've learned, but I'll put it this way: in 6 months' time, this is going to be on everybody's radar screen, and it's also in my long decades of being a creative person. I've never encountered something that was so dynamic and was changing so quickly as AI generated. You've got pictures. It's going to go into text. It's going to go into movies.
Yep.
For better or worse, there's so many bright people working together to create the applications that it's going to be a game changer. The other thing I just want to say is now I know that prompt engineering is a skill set in and of itself.
Yeah.
And again, there's all these resources that are just popping up to help develop more predictable prompts.
Yeah. There are also services online where people have created prompt generators. And so it will give you, here are 100 genres of art. Here are, all these different things you can have. And you can kind of click boxes. If you're not familiar with art, this is forcing people to become familiar with art and study art history because they want to now generate things in particular styles. And they're like, oh, I didn't know what Baroque was. I didn't know what pointillism was. Right? And now I'm having to understand art in order to generate an image for myself that maybe I didn't understand before. So there's an education happening right now that it's fascinating to see where history and the future are sort of blending in this weird technology that I think is going to completely revolutionize where we go creatively. And it's going to disrupt a lot of things. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting.
Just it's making me think. People say if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. But what you're saying is now, if you don't know your history, you can't create
The future. Yeah. Thank you for saying it that way. That's what's happening. Yeah. And if you don't know your biases, you can't understand what's happening. If you do know them, you're able to play with the technology in creative ways.
Well, and also, every technology that's come along, people have said, oh, this is going to replace this. And it doesn't seem to work that way with us. it seems like what we do is we take the new stuff and recycle it into some and pull everything up here, and it's just like we're evolving, but still we still do paintings,
Right.
even though there's a camera.
Yeah, I mean, non-fungible tokens, who's heard of the NFT art that's like, do you go and buy those necessarily? It's a mode of making images and selling art online. AI generated art is a different way. Not everybody's gonna connect with it. They're gonna want a different kind of work, as consumers of art. Yeah, I think there's room for a lot of things. And I think as artists, if you use this as a tool in your own art making, I think that's one way to look at it, right? It doesn't have to be the art. It can be a way of helping you generate ideas, of playing with different things. Like, what if I took my style and imported this other type of media, right? I don't know.
Are there other AI applications than those that contribute to art? Where, number one, they are just independent, they are something different entirely where AI is used?
You mean such as like writing or?
Yes?
Yes.
Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it's being used in a lot of ways, and so what Stephen over here was saying is that right now, images are one way that people are using AI generation software, but it's also being used to generate text. Like in academia right now, one of the big things is, oh gosh, somebody just wrote a dissertation using what's called GPT-3 and telling the artificial intelligence, write a dissertation about yourself with citing all, references and with grammar. And it spit it out, and they submitted it to a journal and said the AI was one of the co-authors. And, I don't know where that's gone yet. It's probably still under review. But there's also been questions about, will students now use this kind of technology to write their homework assignments? And what does that mean in terms of how we assess knowledge, right? Are people going to have to go back to the old days where you used to stand in front of the room and dissertate, right, at the end of the semester? Here's what I know about what I learned in class. And you have to ask people, because the technology can create some of that for you, and it's hard to assess, right? So images, text, music, movie generation is happening. I think movie makers, because it's so expensive to produce a film, they're starting to use AI to help create backgrounds, extras, like all the background stuff, so that you can focus on your primary actors and content, and not have to pay. True. So that's one of the downsides of all of this, right?
Right.
So there's always going to be stuff. There's always going to be stuff. Yeah.
So I work in to answer that partially answer that question, I work in utility adjacent industry, and I know a lot of the research for AI in what I do is kind of in like outage prediction and response to that sort of thing, so that we have a fairly antiquated infrastructure that your power we just had, my wife and I, we had a power outage the other day, and we call the line and it says it'll be on in 2 hours, so we call in 2 hours when it's not on, and they say it'll be on in 2 hours, but there's all this predictive analysis that uses machine learning AI that can reroute power and all of these things that.
So did you hear that? It's just everyday services. AI is being used in call centers. Basic things where we know the rules about how humans should behave, and we can predict the kinds of things they might want to do. It's cheaper to create a rules-based model that routes people through the search for information and connection.
Self-driving cars,
yeah.
That makes me realize I've talked to robots before. When your website wants you to chat with them, when they keep putting that little bubble up, don't you want to chat with a representative? It's not a representative.
No, it's not.
It's
You're right.
AI.
Yeah, it
I've been talking to robots.
Yep.
Yeah.
Coaching is going that direction as well. They, as I said, I'm a coach. I talk with people one-on-one, but there are people who've created chatbots that they will ask you questions, and it allows you to express yourself in writing to a chatbot, and based on certain keywords it finds in there, it will ask you new questions, right? Or it might say, do you want to talk about this or that? And you get to select which path you want to take. And one of the reasons they're doing this is because they feel that it helps to democratize services that might cost hundreds of dollars if you engaged in one-on-one executive coaching, for example. Now somebody can pay $5 for an app and still be able to express their thoughts and have somebody ask them, or something ask them questions that get them thinking about something they might be struggling with. So, yes.
I'm assuming that this works in foreign languages.
That I don't know. It does work in emojis. Yeah, yeah. And I think in part because emojis, they're images, but they're associated with a numeric code, and that numeric code is attached to a word description. And so it's basically shorthand for, a smiley face has like a 6-digit code associated with it, and that says smiley face in the thing. So if you include that, that smiley face will be generated, yes.
So a lot of times I use binary code in my artistry. I assume it would work with that.
It might, I don't know. It's an experiment. It's all an experiment. That's all I want to say about it. It's all an experiment. Yeah.
I'm assuming that each word you use comes from the dictionary, okay? There might be 10 definitions. Does this for like storm, it's storming outside?
Yeah.
Might be a hurricane, might be 10 different definitions. This, I'm assuming, always uses the first definition.
That
I
I
would
don't
not
know.
assume that.
You
I
can
would-
try it, yeah.
So I also have a background in linguistics.
Okay.
Um, like from the 90s when it was very early, a lot of this was very early, but there's a lot of predictive, like there are online dictionaries where for the translators use that you can type in a word or a phrase and it will look it up in the target language, and it doesn't just give you definitions or like here's a list of words that could translate that term. It pulls contextual stuff because there's this vast resource of linguistic stuff on the web. It can just pull that word from all these different contexts, and based on what the English context, you put in a whole sentence, and based on what the English context is, it will. So it's probably not just looking at the first definition. It's probably looking contextually.
So it may also be looking at contextually looking at the words that you use in your prompt to try and discern which meaning you might be thinking of. So it's an experiment. So if you just type in storm and get something that you don't like, maybe you try storm clouds with lightning,
Yeah.
right? And you get more specific.